Hey, welcome back, sports fans, to another fantastic episode of the Browns Only. But it's actually a special episode today. We'll be doing the free agency wrap episode, if you would, of Browns Only, giving you an idea of what's went down so far in the free agency period since it started here about 2 weeks ago, mid-March, around March 12th. There have been gobs of signings around the NFL. Potentially billions of dollars have been spent. Billions of dollars. Should I even have to introduce myself by now? My name is Rudy Rude, the man that goes by many names. But one thing is for sure, I am your resident Browns fan, fanatic, GM at sometimes, draft analyst, and in this case, free agency breaker downer. I think that is a verb now. I just made it into one. But let's get right into it, folks, because there are so many signings around the NFL that it's kind of hard to decide where to start. I did want to touch on some of the bigger signings that have taken place recently, but then also I think the big story right now in free agency is how Aaron Rodgers, don't worry, Browns fans, you diehard Browns fans too, I'm going to tie it all back to the Browns. It is somewhat Browns related in the fact that Aaron Rodgers right now, he kind of has the league, I don't know, held hostage because he's not sure what he wants to do. He just visited Pittsburgh for a second time the other day. Still has not come away with a contract. Obviously played for the Jets last year. Played pretty decent down the stretch, coming back off that Achilles the year before, that Achilles injury that caused him to miss his season. Again, I always tying it back to the Browns. We're no strangers to Achilles injuries too soon. Maybe not. We're not talking about Deshaun Watson. Maybe he'll come up later in the show. But the fact that Aaron Rodgers, again, hasn't signed with Pittsburgh. He wanted to go to Minnesota. Minnesota don't want you, Aaron. I think I mentioned that on the last show. They've said they're good with J.J. McCarthy going into the season after losing Daniel Jones. That's something I was going to mention. Daniel Jones, the former Giant, got cut by the Giants during last season. End up with the Vikings. Vikings are no longer keeping him. He'll be the starting quarterback for the Colts, who did sign him to I believe it was like 1 year, $15 million deal to compete with Richardson there to see what would happen there with the starting position. So that is very interesting. So that's one job that is no longer, well, we say up for grabs, or at least Richardson's to have just given to him. We knew they'd likely bring in a veteran in the Colts. Had Joe Flacco in that position as a bridge quarterback last year. Other moves in free agency, like quarterback moves, Sam Darnold went to the Seahawks, signed a large deal, $100 million deal there with the Seahawks a few years. Of course, he was the former third overall pick for the Jets, played for Minnesota, had a great year for them, leading their team to 14 wins last year, and just moving basically throughout the NFL. Davante Adams, he signed a big contract with the Rams. That was one of the early signings in free agency that was an effect kind of Aaron Rodgers, right? Leaving the Jets. Davante Adams played for the Jets last season. He was no longer going to stay with the Jets, cut by the Jets, and then he signed with the Rams. Justin Fields, again, Russell Wilson's the name that'll come up. They were both together there last year for the Steelers. Neither of those guys likely to be going back to the Steelers. Steelers in quite a quandary right now with their quarterback position, but Fields went to the Jets on a 2-year, $40 million deal. Of course, the former Bear Steeler quarterback was 4-2 last year. He was, of course, an Ohio State product, had great success there, and we'll see if he could be a franchise guy there for the Jets. Maybe look for them to still draft a QB. Again, lots of other signings. Some of these are real recent. Michael Gallup going to the Commanders, former Cowboys receiver. Vikings signed Rondale Moore, another receiver. Mecole Hardman, the former Chief. He's going to sign with a 1-year deal, or he signed a 1-year deal with the Packers. Little Jordan Humphrey, receiver, signing with the Giants. Cornerback Jeff Okudah signs with the Vikings. Texans signed Ronald Darby, the ex-Jaguar corner, earlier on in free agency. The Texans extend cornerback Daryl Stingley Jr. actually making him the highest paid cornerback. Listen to this, Caleb. Got my son in the house today. Stingley is a corner, and he signed a 3-year, $90 million extension on top of his deal he already had. 3 years, $90 million. You do the math. You're good at math. We count it up. That's $30 million a year. $89 million guaranteed. That's crazy, isn't it? All right, another deal. Defensive end, former Giant Azeez Ojulari signs with the Eagles. So he signed with the Super Bowl champions. He had 6 sacks for the Eagles last year. Cooper Rush, the backup quarterback, he actually is going to be the backup quarterback now for the Ravens. Don't know if that's a upgrade, but he started quite a few games down the stretch as Dak was hurt for Dallas. But we'll go from Cooper Rush to Cooper Kupp. We all knew that Cooper Kupp, the Rams were looking to trade him. He ended up being cut by the Rams, but he signed by the Seahawks. So Cooper Kupp finds his home. At one point, he was being courted by, who was it? They had Kupp in for a visit, and they were very interested, but Kupp said, you know what, I want to stay out of here on the West Coast, so he ends up signing with the Seahawks. A recent sign that just happened like yesterday definitely affects the Browns. Our backup quarterback last year, Jameis, that a lot of people, I fell in love with down the stretch. Jameis, you saw the good of Jameis, you saw the bad of Jameis, the interceptions, right? But I mean, he could sling it. There was a couple games he threw for like 400, 500 yards, not an exaggeration. He threw for 497 one game. And so he signs a 2-year deal with the Giants to maybe be their bridge quarterback. We don't know what'll happen with the Giants. The Giants are drafting at 3. So we know that there are 2 quarterbacks that believe to be potentially going at the top of the draft. So they get Jameis. They're still in the hunt for Russell Wilson. Again, a name that'll come up because Russell Wilson he did just visit with the Browns and the Giants this past week or the week before. And so that's still up in the air whether you're signed with those teams. But in the meantime, Jameis Winston signs a 2-year, $8 million deal, could be up to $16 million deal with the Giants. So he will no longer be a backup quarterback for the Browns this year. But, we talked about what the Browns did at the quarterback position with Kenny Pickett last week. So no big news or updates there. The former 49ers running back Jordan Mason, another running back that I thought maybe the Browns should pursue in free agency, was traded to the Vikings and did sign and agree to a 2-year, $7 million deal there. QB Gardner Minshew. He did leave the Raiders, right? He played for the Raiders last year. He signed with the Chiefs to be the backup there. Obviously, the backup Mahomes. They also re-signed Kareem Hunt, which is, somewhat Browns related. Joey Bosa, another Ohio guy going to Ohio State. Those Bosa brothers. He thought about going to play with his brother, right? The former Charger thought about going to the Niners to play with his brother Nick Bosa, but instead he signs a 1-year deal with the Bills for $14 million. Dallas signed defensive end Dante Fowler Jr. to a 1-year, $8 million deal. Don't forget DeMarcus Lawrence, jettisoned by the Cowboys, not re-signed, did leave in free agency to go sign with Seattle. So it fills that void for them. Dallas does make a move to fill the running back void, kind of created when they lost a running back that did very well for them. Last year, they signed Miles Sanders, who the Panthers had released shortly before that. Very recent signing, the former Jets tight end Tyler Conklin signs a deal with the Chargers. So he'll go play for Harbaugh and likely Herbert there as well at the QB position. Now, the Bengals, in local news, the Bengals did lock up both of their wide receivers, T. Higgins, who was on that franchise deal, the second franchise deal, and then also Jamar Chase. So they locked both of those guys up to the tune of, I think, one was Chase might have been 4 years, 160 some odd million, something like that, something crazy, right? And then you look at Higgins coming in around, I think it was 4 years, 105, somewhere around in that range. But it does, it's interesting enough, makes Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in league history, and that was a mark just set previously the week before by Myles Garrett with his extension that he did sign with the Browns. So both of those guys got signed for the Bengals. Good news for the Bengals. Bad news, on the other hand, it does take away from what they can do defensively, who they can sign, and the proof or the biggest evidence of that is in Trey Hendrickson, the sack leader from last year in the NFL, not being re-signed. The defensive end is still looking for a deal from the Bengals or whomever. He's still available to be signed. And so he'll look to get his money either from the Bengals or elsewhere. But one thing's for sure, they just gave a big old bag to both of their star receivers. We don't got to worry about the franchise tag talk with T. Higgins anymore. The Browns made some signings of their own, so definitely transition into Browns news. They signed a left guard, which a lot of people would probably think that that wouldn't be a position of need for the Browns because of having Joe Bitonio, because they haven't Wyatt Teller. But the Browns did sign Tevin Jenkins, who was a former second-round pick, 39th overall in the 2021 draft. He has left a lot of games due to injury, but honestly, he was last year on a not so great Bears line, maybe their best offensive lineman, right? And so the Browns signed him to a 1-year deal, a low risk, high reward signing. Again, left guard with Joe Bitonio there, contemplated retirement coming into this season, gonna come back, but we don't know what's going to happen after the 2025 season, right? So I think it was a good signing because, again, with Tevin Jenkins being a former high pick, playing at a high level when he's available on the field, I always say what's the most important ability? It's availability, right? So Tevin Jenkins hasn't always had that, been a little banged up, ended on as a starter for the Bears. Get one of their better offensive linemen. So if nothing else will help us with that guard depth, we drafted Zinter last year out of Michigan coming off an injury, but he was very disappointing. Honestly, when he did come in and have to be depended on to start, he wasn't a starting caliber guy like Teller and, Bitonio, who's, undoubtedly a Hall of Famer at that position. But, could Tevin Jenkins be our starting left tackle? We all know with Big Thanos, right? Out of Ohio State, Dwan Jones, he doesn't necessarily always stay healthy himself. So building up that depth on the offensive line, very important for the Browns. I actually love that signing. Tevin Jenkins was a great pick, I think, for the value that they could get there at that, position to be able to build out that depth. I think that a lot of people like myself thought that the Browns might go heavy offensive line in this draft. But I don't think the need is there as much now with the signing like Tevin Jenkins, with the signing like that we saw earlier, on in the process. The Browns have been, I would say somewhat aggressive in addressing this, with the Washington free agent they signed, Cornelius, again, about a week ago. We got DeAndre Carter, another smart signing, I think, by the Browns. We have a receiver who's, played in the league for a while. He had a career high 46 receptions with the Chargers in 2022, but he's been an NFL journeyman. He's a receiver, kick returner. He actually was second in the league in kick return yards for the Bears last year. So that's actually, pretty impressive to bring that in at a position where the Browns have been struggling at. I wouldn't say traditionally it's been great. Like guys like Eric Metcalf, I can remember Josh Cribbs, school Browns fan, but it's been a while since we had anybody that could really take it to the house. DPJ was a guy I liked that was a great kick returner, punt returner, but he hasn't played here in a couple years. He's still out there, guys. I think he's on like the Lions practice squad. I keep talking about a guy we could bring back each week, but I'll tell you what we did do. We resigned Tony Brown. Seems minuscule, Tony Brown II at corner. I mean, maybe a special teams guy that really excels sometime in the preseason, provides depth as maybe your nickel dime cornerback gets hurt during the regular season. Cam Mitchell will likely be there at that nickel position or dime if needing to be. But we're not sure about Greg Newsome and another guy, Wyatt Teller. Again, I think that he becomes just slightly, a little bit, maybe minusculely expendable because of, again, the depth, basically. And also just, just looking at, bringing in Jenkins again, is Teller, potentially going to be traded in the offseason, maybe before or even after the draft. Is Newsome, is he going to potentially be traded? Tony Brown, honestly, not a great cover corner Inexperienced guy, again, a death piece guy you think of as fifth or sixth corner, but that is the kind of player that you do want to fill out your roster, especially in the offseason. Browns did actually make an important and big signing yesterday, last night. Again, I'm taping the show on the 22nd, March 22nd. The Browns signed Jerome Baker, former Ohio State linebacker. So he's a guy that could, provide some quality depth, if not be one of the starters at that linebacker position. We do have Hicks coming back. We have Bush that we just re-signed. We still don't know about the future of JOK, but another situation where I say, like, again, where they signed the veteran from Washington, the Browns, on the O-line. They signed the Tevin Jenkins, the former Bear, on the O-line. Positions that definitely would need to draft heavily, I would say, pre-free agency, but now, that's what free agency is for, to fill some of those holes. So you could say, hey, this is not as big of a need as it was before the free agency period. So the Browns have addressed, I would say, some positions of need very well, like offensive line. And again, here with this signing of Jerome Baker, I definitely like that signing. So we'll see what he can do there. And I really wanted to talk about with Jameis Winston getting signed yesterday. I wanted to talk about how Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers are still available. And it was almost like musical chairs. It's very interesting how Aaron Rodgers, he may retire, right? So even my son Caleb knows that Aaron Rodgers has played in the league longer than he's been alive. And, he's really thinking about, Aaron Rodgers takes his time every year, every offseason, especially when he's come back from that injury, does some ayahuasca, travels around the world, really, I'm sure does whatever he wants. And, thought about running for a political position, right, last season. But I was getting at, and what I thought about making the show about originally was how Aaron Rodgers was holding the league up with his decision. Again, meeting with the Steelers a couple times, Mike Tomlin and him, they have a good rapport. But I wonder, is Aaron Rodgers maybe asking for too much money? Is he asking for too much power? You know how he usually comes in and says, hey, this receiver like Aaron Lazard, we need to trade for this guy. Let's get one of my old former offensive guards, or whatever the case may be, right? It turns into Aaron Palooza. And I really think that, with Tomlin, I don't think, necessarily he's going for that with the Steelers. The standards, the standard, all that kind of thing that he, preaches there. But what's very interesting is Russell Wilson is still out there as well. As I mentioned earlier, he's met with both the Browns and the Giants a couple weeks ago. And it was interesting to see he didn't come away with the deal in either place. The rumor was, right, my inside information was that he, in the meeting with the meeting with the Browns, is more casual. He really just met with Myles Garrett. And also, ironically, right, Deshaun Watson was at the facility, talked with him for a bit. But then with the Giants, one of the things that was a hang up of him not coming away with the deal is he was really interested in having a multi-year deal. And, it's pretty obvious, right, that the Giants, they just signed Jameis Winston, but, they are likely looking at a draft too, right, for a future quarterback. So that's, I think, something that goes into the thinking, like, especially like with Aaron Rodgers. He said he might wait until after the draft to sign with the team. And honestly, by that time, a team might not be that interested in Aaron Rodgers. They might just want to move forward with the quarterback that they drafted, whoever they just signed in free agency. The Browns haven't shown much of an interest in Aaron Rodgers. I think that feeling is mutual. Again, Aaron Rodgers is kind of all encompassing when he comes to your team. The Browns will have a younger team that they might look to have kind of a bounce back type of situation from. I think that, obviously we really need a spark at the QB position right now, still only having Kenny Pickett there. That's, it is laughable, but again, we are still in contention for Russell Wilson. And that's been one of the big rumors that's been coming out, is that the Browns do still have the interest in Russell Wilson. Another big rumor has been Carson Wentz. I don't remember if I mentioned him last show, but that's obviously been something that has been rumored, that there's a mutual interest there. Who Carson Wentz was a backup in Kansas City last year. And so, obviously he hasn't played, much football since starting at Washington, and previously before that in Philadelphia, where, back in, I think it was about 2017, he was actually, he didn't get the MVP, but he was playing at an MVP level, and I think came about second in the MVP voting. But again, still Russell and Aaron Rodgers still out there, Jameis signed. So those are a couple of the big quarterback free agency dominoes still out there. A couple other guys out there, ironically, Ryan Tannehill, who actually sat out last year, and again, just like I mentioned, Carson Wentz. So those are, except for Aaron Rodgers, so we say Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz. Maybe not Tannehill, but those are the QBs that are still available. And again, the Browns have interest in at least potentially Russell Wilson and Carson Wentz to be their future QBs. So as you're hearing this episode from the Doghouse, you already know that the sponsors of the show, Big Rude Promotions and Entertainment, and also Dynamic Qualities NIL, advertising, promotion, and representation group, can handle your representation needs for NIL. I did want to finish off the show with just going through, again, with it being still a lead up to the draft, I'll still do a couple draft shows, probably another free agency wrap show. I broke down like quarterback and running back last week. And I kind of broke down like, the top prospects at that position. So I'm going to actually quickly do it today for the wide receiver position. I wanted to mention an omission from last week, though. There's a running back named Basil Tootin from Virginia Tech. He ran a 4.32 40. That's fast, ain't it? 4.32 40 in the combine. And that's a guy whose name eluded me last week, but that's who it was. Basil Tootin from Virginia Tech. That's a running back to watch, maybe going third, fourth roundish, but great speed and actually some return ability as well. Receiver, we know who's the top receiver likely going in this draft is Teteroa McMillan out of Arizona, 6'5", wingspan. We might call him big. I was thinking of the dinosaur with the wings, like a Tetradonus or something, isn't it? Something like that. I was about to give him a nickname on the show, Tetrasaurus. I don't know. I need to brush up on my dinosaur before I try to do some impromptu stuff like that. The Tetrasaura. No, anyway, let me stop messing up this man's name, Teteroa McMillan, because that's what I'm gonna call him. You got that, again, large wingspan, 50-50 ball monster. Again, guy like that goes up for him, 80-20s, right? So he's likely going first, probably going to go up in the top 10 of the draft. I mean, look for him to go as early as to the Raiders, I believe, at 6. I believe they're drafting at 6. Emeka Egbuka, to me, second best receiver in his draft. He may not go second between the receivers because a guy like Matthew Golden, who I got right after him. Matthew Golden ran a super fast 40. I think it was 4.4. So that was impressive after having a good season at Texas. I think those guys are kind of neck and neck. Luther Burns, another guy who ran a decent 40, definitely an impressive receiver coming out of Missouri, had a great season last year. 2 wide receivers out of Iowa State, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Both of these guys look to go earlier than you might think, probably both by the second round, late second round, third round, potentially. I mean, I wouldn't look to draft them in the 4th round because they won't be there. They'll be like, gone. And then Jack Bech, if you watched any of like the recent Senior Bowl or like East-West Shrine, he balled out in one of them, man. He had a loss in his family, and he came out and he did his thing. He caught like I believe it was like the game-winning touchdown, and I know it's just a college all-star game, but I mean, he showed definitely a lot of NFL promise, right, with his range, his size, his ability to go up and get those high point catches. So that's a guy who definitely has some potential out of TCU to be I'd say a day 2 pick that could make somebody very happy with this value that they get out of him in the draft. Alec Ayamaner out of Stanford. Don't know a lot about this guy, but he's a receiver who, again, got listed in the top 10. Jalen Royals out of Utah, hearing his name a lot. Trey Harris, I think, who I got listed as my 10th best receiver coming out in this year's draft. Very interesting about Trey Harris that he was a guy that I've been hearing a lot about coming into the draft process. Is talking about, I like this receiver. He could potentially be a number 1 receiver. Again, coming out of Ole Miss, same school as like DK Metcalf, right? Makes you think of that. Or even like an Elijah Moore. Interestingly enough, with Elijah Moore, as we talk about receivers, he did visit the Raiders last week, but he didn't come away with the deal. So hopefully the Browns will still sign him. I'm going to talk more about, like, again, breaking down certain positions, a need going forward for the Browns. Like when we talked about offensive line, how that's kind of been addressed with some of the signings that they made. Again, some of their other positions of weakness, like running back, for example, we kind of touched on last show, running backs to look for in the draft. Same type of thing here with the receiver position, with only Jerry Jeudy being the, starting caliber receiver we have that's locked up right now at number one receiver. Cedric Tillman's a young guy. We don't know what we're going to get from him in terms of health and durability. So we'll see what he does. But then also Elijah Moore being unsigned, that creates a void or hole. With that being said, potentially getting any of those top 10 wide receivers in the draft might help, but really want to get value there. Similarly, Stephon Diggs actually just visited the Patriots, but he didn't come away with the deal, so he's still unsigned. Forget the former Texan Bill Viking, still potentially one of the better receivers in the league, but missed most of last year due to injury. And then also Amari Cooper, who the Browns traded away for a third-round pick. Wouldn't that be something if the Browns end up re-signing him? Because they have him coming in for a visit next week. So that's pretty funny, right? That you could re-sign a guy that you traded for a third-round pick, played with the Bills the rest of that season, and then to end up re-signing them. That would be pretty interesting, uncommon, unusual. Keenan Allen is another receiver who I meant to mention last show, but he had 70 catches for the Bears last year, what we think of as a down year for Keenan Allen. But, I mean, we could use the 70 catch receiver as a second receiver, right? I mean, let's be honest. So look out for whether Russell Wilson, comes back to visit the Browns again, whether he potentially signs there, or whether it's maybe, again, Carson making Wentz. We'll see what happens there. But again, hopefully it gave you a little bit better idea of who, some of the better receivers are in this draft, and some of the, bigger signings, even with, again, guys like Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams moving this offseason. A lot of it, predicated by, again, other guys leaving. Like, again, I was originally going to call this show the 6 degrees of separation of Aaron Rodgers, right? We got like Davante Adams signing with the Rams, no longer a Jet, right? And then, all kind of things that were affected by it. Again, Russell Wilson not signing yet, again, not being re-signed by the Steelers. Still a lot of interest in, Aaron Rodgers, but that not being done yet. And again, whether Russell Wilson might sign with the Giants, but that looks a little bit more likely with, again, something that is really Browns related, again, signing the former Browns backup quarterback from last year, Jameis Winston. So I feel like there was a couple of other signings I didn't mention during the show, like Brandon Cook signing with the Saints. Jameis Winston got me thinking about the Saints. So there's still signings going on every day. Like I mentioned, that Brandon Cook signing, Conklin signing, the tight end for the Chargers. Again, the Browns, I think, could end up being a big signing for us to sign the former linebacker Jerome Baker, or the former Ohio State linebacker Jerome Baker. So that could be something that helps out a lot, again, in the position of potential weakness. Again, probably would have been something I addressed in the future show as well, again, about those positions we have to really look at in the draft. But one thing's for sure, man, the Browns, how they operate in free agency, again, getting a kickoff punt returner receiver who could potentially contribute in DeAndre Carter, Jerome Baker, Tevin Jenkins. Those were good quality, solid signings, and didn't also break the bank at the beginning of free agency. And I think that's what the Browns needed to do, especially with, the situation, of course, with the Deshaun Watson contract. That's always going to play a toll in the decision-making, I think, for the next couple years, right? But, hey, it's been a pleasure, man, rocking with y'all today, being able to kind of get y'all caught up on what was going on in free agency. So you know what I'm going to do, right? It's football, like, season for me all the time, all year round, 24/7, 365. So I'm going to bring you these shows as I'm football hungry. And, I go back and watch some old tape of the Browns, some Browns games on, NFL Plus, you know what I mean? And I go back and I watched it. I watched like the Raiders game this past week that it was one that Watson, I think, struggled us to the loss. And it wasn't just really on him. I mean, it's a lot of different factors that went into it. But One thing is for sure, I know I'm just bouncing all over the place now. The Browns got to improve that running game. So look for a running back, whether it be a Nick Chubb, who I think we need more than that. We need to infuse some new talent, bringing them on in. I heard somebody say, should we think about trading Jerome Ford? I said, what? Man, Jerome Ford is probably, I think, best used as a second running back and a running back by committee backfield. But we need to get that first guy. So whether it's an Omarion Hampton, like I mentioned last show, whether it's a Travion Henderson, whether it's one of those guys from Penn State, whether it's a Basil Tootin that I just mentioned earlier in the show from Virginia Tech, who's also a returner. We really need to look at that running back position because don't forget about the tradition of the Browns. You know, it's based off that, you know, Jim Brown, Marion Motley, that, you know, that tradition of, again, like guys like I grew up watching Leroy Horde, Ernest Biner, Eric Metcalf, but certainly we have to get back touchdown Tommy Vardell. Maybe not. That's not what we're doing today, folks. We're not talking about touchdown Tommy Vardell. But in any event, folks, I am going to say goodbye, good night. Thank you for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to talk football with you guys. So I'll be back soon. And tell you what, make a commitment to you. We will come back here within the next week and definitively put the kibosh and the wrap on free agency. And then we'll also lead into some drafts. So we'll be intermingling those topics because remember, they are so connected, right? The free agency is to address needs at the beginning of the NFL offseason. And then once that period has, you know, kind of slowed down and ended, it leads right up into the draft. So that's where you really feel the not only the needs that you still have, but then also you really look toward the future and hope, a new hope at QB is what the Browns need to do at 2. I'll talk to you soon about it. Thanks again for joining Browns Only. Have a great rest of your day. Be blessed.